Chapter 7. Before I had a chance to take in the scenery of the historic Bailgate area, I realized I had already walked through it, and had now reached the art gallery. I faced the automatic doors, and to my surprise they had opened. It was far past closing time, and I had only flirted with the idea of visiting the gallery's facade as a passing attraction before heading to the nearest pub or bar. But there it was, opening, as if just for me, and I could hear sophisticated laughter coming from the courtyard gallery wing. I entered. I was feeling lethargically rebellious. I knew some of the staff there, and when it suited me, moments like this, I could slip in as part of the crowd. I was confronted immediately by a small fat lady who, it seemed, had mastered her front-of-the-house monologue. "Hello, sir. Have you come for the private exhibition?" I just said, "Yes." "Delighted to have you. On behalf of the Indoctus Foundation, in partnership with the collection, we have a very special selection of work for you by young emerging British talent who have been nominated for the East Midlands Innovation Award. Please follow the hall round to your left and help yourself to a complimentary glass of champagne." I simply responded, after a short pause, with another "yes," and proceeded toward the exhibition space. Luckily, the table displaying glasses of wine was not inside the courtyard gallery wing, but rather stood in the hall parallel to the exhibition space. I quietly walked over to the solitary table, supporting 2 meager glasses of champagne, and picked up one of them. Looking through the door frame into the gallery space, I could just about see the vibrating shoulders of people, covered in cotton, silk, tweed, leather, and sometimes nothing. I was content with this, and carried on drinking. It was already obvious from the affable clamor that it was indeed the guests who paraded themselves around as the artworks, seducing each other with the sounds of their jangling bracelets, the flinging of silk scarves, the repositioning of spectacles, subtle forms of capture through various witticisms. The actual artworks seemed to hang quietly, almost ghost-like in the background, and if they had been blessed with mouths, they would have hung half open, ajar, like children filled with misunderstanding. Suddenly a face popped into the right-hand side of the exhibition entrance, as if she were a puppet in a pantomime perfectly framed by the open door. She began, like they all do, with strange sounds and gestures, as if something were imminent. Something is always imminent to these people. "Well, do come in. We need an outsider's perspective on this work exhibited in the center here. Me and my husband have been quarreling over it." The husband interrupted cautiously, "Well, I don't really have an opinion on it, darling." The woman paused for a moment, looked at me with a faint smile, and continued, "Well, I think these hanging bag things look like the hanging bits of meat you find in a butcher's. Would you agree?" Before I had a chance to respond, she continued, "You can still see them hanging from side to side, can't you? Quite disturbing." "They're not moving, darling," the husband said sincerely. "But look how they all move when you blow them." She blew once and failed to distribute the inertia of the artwork, as if she were a small child trying to blow out all her birthday candles in one go. She continued to intervene in the secret dormant integrity of the object, stepping even closer and blowing even harder. "See how they dance? See how light they are?" she replied happily. The husband pulled himself upright from the wall he was leaning on and stepped closer to the work they were observing. "You said they were hanging cattle a moment ago, and now they dance through the air?" The wife gave him a sharp look. "Well, I have changed my mind, and quite rightly so. See how pure they are, set in white, presented so elegantly." I stepped in and began to lose myself a little. "I believe black to be the new white, madam. It is all colors at once, don't you know?" "Nonsense, it isn't even a color," the wife replied. The husband, sensing that our conversation was becoming uneasy, decided to change the topic. "I say, did you see any of the protests in town today? Do you know that they are planning to build a mosque here in London? There has been a ballot and permission has been granted. Well, this afternoon, hundreds of anti-Muslimism protesters, or anti-whatever protesters, marched through the streets and gathered at the place where the mosque will be built. And then a bunch of anti-racism protesters arrived. Can you imagine? Police cars everywhere. Most of the town had to be shut off." The wife replied with frustration, "Just what is the problem with building a mosque there? It is natural in this age to accommodate for such things. And, of course, it will be beneficial to us in the end. Imagine how beautiful it will look." She glanced toward her husband and prodded him with a "darling." He simply responded with a "well." The wife continued, "And the imprudence of it all, only days after that poor Muslim girl was found in the Brayford." She took a few moments' silence as if in repose. "Decapitated, wrapped up in a bin bag. Have you ever heard of such a thing?" The husband responded, "Well, they say that the reason so many people agreed to the building of the mosque, Muslim or non-Muslim, was because of the great sympathy people felt toward the young lady Tracy O'Hayav, the mosque being considered an act of condolence." "Condolence?" the wife replied. "What on earth would be comforting about all of this? An innocent woman was raped, stabbed, and then decapitated, wrapped in a black bin liner, and thrown into a river. Such a thing cannot be judged in relative terms. It was just a week ago when that poor soldier in London was, well, you know what I'm talking about." I had stayed silent the whole time through this conversation. Finally, they noticed and looked at me as if I might wish to add something to their conversation. "Well, perhaps now I see what you mean about the dynamic quality of the artwork. Yes, almost flamboyant. Perhaps, I mean, this is just a thought, it harks back to a type of Rococo fascination with form. The infinite folds indexed into the fabric-like sculptures connects to that distant world of Watteau's painted dresses. Definitely a sensibility more sublime and sensuous than that of the modernists, the austere representation of that brute reality they were trying so hard to capture, confined in the pseudo-intellectual and religious white walls of the gallery space that demanded their appraisal. Perhaps it points to that dramatic white found in the interplay of light and dark conjured by the great chiaroscuro artist Caravaggio. Perhaps, if you really look hard enough, a glint of that white found in Vermeer's Milk Lady. Yes, something milky, nutritious. You can almost feel the northern Renaissance beyond the Alps placing their stamp on the sensation here. As if this present-day artist were saying something that Europe, after all, was still to be looked upon as the future of the artistically cultivated man, the man of taste. And on that note I must leave, as I have rudely barged in on your leisurely, some may say even quite passionate conversation in company, so therefore I bid you a good evening." The husband and wife simply stared at me in a state of perplexity whilst unconsciously nodding. They continued watching me as though I were in a silent film, wander out the door, pick the final glass of champagne up from the table, gulp it down in one, and exit stage right, as it were. Before successfully exiting down the hall and out of the building, I was again addressed by the lady at the front of the house. The woman had become a small and persistent tumor to me. At base, she was an ugly, fat, slow creature, no form to her, no signs of beauty nor agility, each layer of flesh lying on the next, squashed and pulled downward by some unknown force like layers of sedimentary rock. I unfortunately and necessarily had to imagine her naked so as to clean her out of my mind, and I understood for a split second why the Nazis rid the Jews of all their clothes before torturing them. Because at the level of flesh we could simply disregard her as a type of error, or some malignant deposit, residue, between the real true forms of the world that shine forth upon us. It could just be chipped off and then perhaps burnt, but the abscess has grown, through rearing, into a false sense of consciousness. And this is perhaps the worst part. When the base material has been dressed in silks and linens, given a hairbrush, has teeth to clean, she might have even acquired shallow, deceptive desires that she gives time to before sleeping at night. Inside her brain, like a pinball machine or a dog's brain, there is simply custom, a certain behavior, a premeditated, conditioned personality. This is what life is presenting to me right now, the slow, gradual lobotomy of itself, upon itself, forgetting with every cut that such actions, such intentions, comes from itself. It was as if with this lady every movement, every action of thought were being suppressed, pulled down into her thick dinosaur neck, given expression down there instead of anywhere celestial. She handed me a leaflet about the gallery and smiled at me as if she were smiling. But it was the world and her ignorance that formed this smile upon her lips. I avoided taking the pamphlet, saying nothing, pushing past her, wiping my now sweaty hands onto my trousers.